Okay. This is like first day at school. Good morning, I'm David Eichove. I'm the co-chair of the Fire Investigations Committee along with Tom May, and we welcome you here to this session on basic areas for fire investigations. The instructional objectives will be basically uniform today. Basically, we want to talk to you about what is briefly NFPA 1033, provide you some understanding of the 16 core concepts that are required under the standard that fire investigators must maintain competence in, and then give you some references and sources for additional information that may evolve from that. Here's the schedule of speakers and topics. There may be some adjustment within an hour or two of one speaker to the next. What's outlined here are the speakers' names, their subject areas, and the actual item numbers that appear in what they call the Suite 16, the 16 concepts that they have for core excellence and for fire investigations. This seminar is nowhere to substitute a thorough and ambitious study of the topics. It's mainly to be just a survey of those topics themselves. NFPA 1033, basically, it's in the 2014 edition, and it's entitled the Standard for Professional Qualifications for Fire Investigators. Basically, it specifies what we call job performance requirements. If you're familiar with KSAs in the government system, knowledge, skills, and ability, these JPRs are the performance requirements that allow a fire investigator, whether they be on the public or private sector, to maintain competence in their field. The JPRs specify requisite knowledge for each one of the areas, and they're required for that. So for a expert fire investigator to testify that they have little or no competence in these areas, I would suggest them basically renew their educational experiences and consider not being an expert at that time. Some of these requirements are borne out in the expert reports that are generated, and an NFPA 1033 does require a report in a fire investigation. In preparing for this lecture, I wanted to make sure that the concerns that were raised in the 2017 report by the American Association for the Advancement of Science, also known as AAAS, were addressed here. And they seem to have the same parallels and the concepts that we have. Also, these PowerPoint slides will be made available and placed on the NAFE website. So they contain materials and some references that you may find beneficial in the future. The 2017 AAAS report came on basically on the foot trail of the 2009 report by the National Academies of Science that raised doubts about the validity and reliability of all of the forensic sciences practices. In 2017, AAAS basically published a follow-up gap assessment study that looked at 25 recommendations specifically in the fire investigation field. And many of these recommendations cover and address NFPA's significant areas, especially the ones in fire investigation technology as well as in fire analysis. The findings basically are separated, and what I did was synopsize these as well as include the page numbers of where you could find these references. One of the significant factors had to deal with fire origin and cause determinations, and basically this is a reminder, basically a shot in the dark to remind investigators that just because you think you've determined the origin, if it's not correct, you basically will basically undermine your investigation because of the cause. So In this report, basically on pages 13 and 18, they said an incorrect determination of a fire's origin generally leads to an incorrect determination of its cause. So these are basically bullet points as well as snapshots of pieces of information that have come about. The area that they looked at in post-flashover fires, basically post-flashover situations, especially way past that point in a fire, basically obliterates or actually sometimes generates fire patterns that are misleading, that may mimic patterns that we're seeing. So caution, I guess, also comes with this report to say that determining the origin of the fire may be difficult in a post-flashover situation. The report also addressed the common or uncommon notion that is sometimes incorrect of a speed of how a fire progresses. And the modern day conditions with the amount of combustibles within, that are contained within enclosures as well as and even into the forest areas, the speed at which the fire progresses may or may not be indicative as whether the fire was accidental, natural, or incendiary in cause. One of the findings that they really honed on about has to deal with computer-assisted deterministic fire models. And there's a misnomer, and it's been addressed in NFPA 921 for several of the issues regarding the appropriate use of fire modeling. And its appropriate use is for testing hypotheses, not generally used for determining the cause or origin of a fire. So these are some caveats that were added and reemphasized in this report, and it's consistent with NFPA 921 and NFPA 1033. Accordingly, one of the 16 requirements of knowledge required of the JPRs by a fire investigator is a working knowledge or an understanding of fire modeling. Locating ignitable liquid residues in fire debris was also emphasized in that report. And in the past, the gold standard was to use a canine detection team to take and to evaluate these points. I have over 45 years of experience in fire investigation and can remember the times when I got down on my hands and knees and sniffed carpeting, which is not an appropriate technique at this time. So I was an old dog, as they may refer to me. But there are other electronic techniques that are used, but occasionally and more frequently dogs are used. So the advice that came from the AAAS report, as well as the National Academy of Sciences, basically mimics and repeats what NFPA 921 says, that canine alerts should not be relied upon as a positive indication of an accelerant without a confirmed laboratory analysis. But also the report addresses that there are other substances that are produced during a fire that may or may not be within the skill sets or the instrumentation of a competent forensic lab, especially if you don't ask for those materials to be checked for. Cognitive bias is an area that really is addressed not only in the National Academy report, but in the AAAS report and in NFPA 921, in which individuals may have expectation bias, cognitive bias, they have adversarial bias. There are biases that we all bring to investigations. And the caution is that in fire investigations, that you should be aware of some of these biases, where you normally might expect to say, oh, I've seen a fire just like this before, or anticipate one before you arrive at the scene. There are other ways to minimize bias, especially with areas such as eyewitness testimony. And ATF, for example, did an excellent article about how to overlay and matrix out numerous eyewitness testimonies or eyewitness observations to be able to put a collage together to to reinforce where, for example, where somebody may have thought the origin of a fire may have been from the inception through its development. Reliability and validity of investigators, and I saved basically a lot of this towards the end. And the most important factor is, which is down on the third bullet, is that there's no scientific basis for concluding the accuracy of certified fire investigators. Terry Dawn Hewitt has always said in the past, during the NFPA committee meetings as well as in her training, that every day is test day. Just because you're certified doesn't mean that you're going to be correct that day. So you basically have to leverage all of your knowledge, your skills, your abilities, and the JPRs to do each individual investigation and put as much fervor and vigor into that as you would normally do. So there's not a lot known about the accuracy of conclusions besides some of the anecdotal testing that was done. When I go to court, when they ask, what do you think the error rate is? I said, well, it's got to be 50% because there's always somebody on the other side saying that I'm wrong. The other thing is that it brings out the insufficient educational and proficiency testing requirements. And that falls on the shoulders of a lot of us in academia, as well as in the training business, that we need to come up with some better and authoritative training benchmarks for proficiency testing. You can obtain these reports through the full report, or they actually have a plain language report, which I enjoyed reading after going through the 50-page AAAS report. I would encourage you to obtain copies of that, and as well as the original NAS report that came through.